Hello, my name is Josephine Tello. Today I'm going to be doing a case conceptualization of Joe Lacks. So Joe Lacks eventually changed his name to Zakaria Bari Abdul Rahman after he changed his religion to Islam. He's an older male in his late 40s, early 50s. He's the youngest of five. His mother is deceased as well as his older sister. He has a distant relationship with his father, and he is very close with his younger sister, well, the youngest sister, Deborah. So presenting problems, he has presenting problems of anger as well as aggression. He also has tendencies of alcoholism as well as isolation. For instance, the most recent event that has occurred is that he was kicked out of his Section 8 housing for smashing a bottle on the back of a woman and pushing her through a plate glass window. He was also kicked out of his assisted living home. Prior to that, he did what he was institutionalized for murdering a man while he was drunk. Another instance before that, actually, when he was younger, he tended to argue a lot with teachers and he would fight students. Some of these situations in school is presumed to have caused or be one of the reasons why he dropped out in the seventh grade. When he was in the military, he was only there for 9 months, but it was discharged because he couldn't adapt to the structure the military had. Most of the time, he was spent in solitary confinement. However, he said he preferred it because then no one would bother him. Impact on himself and others. His behavior is impacting him from having a stable home and building close relationships. The only close relationship he really truly has seen in the movie, even in the book, is with his sister Deborah. However, even Deborah is cautious when she's around him. She does show him love and kindness. However, he is not too close with his father. A lot of that he blames on his actions that his father has caused, making him grow up in the environment that he was raised in, and also because he didn't mark his mother's grave when she passed. So, and he didn't even learn a lot about his mother. It was very hush hush. So unfortunately, he didn't get to understand his mother and the love that she had for him, and he couldn't even try to find a way to, grieve his mother because there was no place for him to grieve. When it comes to predisposing factors, early life experiences, like I mentioned earlier, his mother actually passed when really short after his birth. Um, his older sister had already passed prior to his birth. A couple months after his mother passed away, he was tested positive for TB and ended up being very sick. He ended up having a long stint in the hospital as well. Um, because of this, he ended up being passed around from cousins to cousins, eventually leading him to be taken care of, him and his siblings being taken care of Ethel and her husband, Galen. Unfortunately, this was not a happy, positive place for him. Ethel had a lot of anger and aggression for unknown reason, as Deborah mentioned, just ended up beating the love out of him, as she states. She would whip him and beat him with fists, beat him with belts. She would tie him up and leave him in the basement for long periods of time, sometimes even overnight. She would force him to stand in the corner of the basement, and if with one foot up, and if he moved, she would beat him. Eventually, this caused him to cut off his emotions, and all that was left for him was anger and aggression. He also had, that family instability. His father wasn't really emotionally present. He was always working. Um, he was, of course, institutionalized. He meant to prison. Um, he's also experienced a lot of poverty. The part of poverty, stems obviously from his parents who grew up in the South in the early 1930s and 40s during Jim Crow. Jim Crow didn't give them the opportunity for them to have a lot of growth and success, so they ended up having to move. Um, Even in their new home, they didn't have that good health care that they needed to be able to take care of themselves. Even though, they're close to John Hopkins and John Hopkins gave them the opportunity to get medical treatment, it was seen as like a last resort. So they had limited educational opportunities. There was not a lot of, interference um, with his emotional behaviors. There's no one there to like guide him to therapy or try to heal his trauma. Everyone just kind of learned to work around it. And then, his family did not have a lot of money to take care of themselves. So unfortunately, he had already these predispositions prior to him being born. And then after his mother passing away, unfortunately, things just kept getting worse and worse for him. Luckily, he did get taken out of that situation, but by that time, during child development, we know how crucial the early years are. His was just so negatively impacted that it ended up continuing to this point in time. Precipitating factors. So, like I mentioned before, the catalyst of his behavior stems from his mother's death, um, and continued stressors. Poverty is a huge stressor. Not having any connection with people around him other than, maybe his sister and of his brothers. New information, for instance, when he found out how his mother's cells were being used and how people were profiting off of it. And, him and his family are sitting there sick. Even him, he ended up being deaf as well as his sister. They're not benefiting from this. So all this harsh, bad stuff keeps happening. And, he's moments of him trying to get better, for instance, his conversion to Islam. Like, he's making the effort, but it's just never enough to get him out or heal from that childhood trauma and the childhood abuse. So the perpetuating factors, again, the anger, aggressive behavior, maladaptive behavior, alcoholism, isolation. We're seeing in the movie and the book that he lives alone or he ends up like jumping around from places, not really having a stable place to live. His enabling family members, like mentioned earlier, they work around him but don't really try to help him. Another instance is like, when he ended up murdering the man named Ivy, instead of, first turning him in, his father's like, no, just send him away and hide him. But that didn't help him because when he ended up going to Laxtown, he spent all the time with his cousins, but they would argue and fight, and he would be drunk all the time, and it made the situation even worse. Protective factors. Some positive things about him is that he is very family based. He loves his sister Deborah. He even has family pride because although he realizes, how they're using their cells and profiting off of it, he's very proud that his mother is able to make such a huge impact in science. He does well with structure. He appreciates, a consistent routine. That's seen when he's in prison. He's like used to that routine, things being a certain way, and he excels in it. Right when he got out of prison, because there's a loss of routine, he ends up, self-destructing again. And another thing is his religion. He switched to Islam, and it gives him like an identity and a purpose. So the plan for him is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, some grounding techniques, breathing techniques, learning how to relax, you know, learning where his behavior is stemming from and trying to heal all that childhood trauma. EMDR as well is used when people experience severe trauma, and the belief is the trauma is stored in the nervous system. So by, thinking about this trauma that he's experiencing it and having, a therapist, have him look at their finger, trace his finger, hopefully is that reconnection of like, hey, you're in a safe place. Another plan would be to connect him with mentors, more specifically mentors within his religion. I feel like that would give him, since he already has that proudness of being Islamic, because that comes from, him changing his name. Hopefully these mentors in this religion can use texts to be able and conversations to be able to guide him to better himself. And lastly, a stable environment. So We notice throughout his life, there's instability as a young child, instability as a, early adult. Even now, with him being kicked out of Section 8 housing and assisted living facility, we need to be able to find him a good, safe place to live where he can go through this therapy and connect with these mentors and be able to start healing. So finally, Joe's predisposition of severe childhood abuse, attachment disruption, and exposure to violence, which was his childhood abuse, combined with the precipitation factor of losing his mother and put into a hostile environment at a young age, created the presenting problems of anger and maladaptive behaviors. The behaviors are maintained by long-term trauma, but protective factors such as Islam and family bond promote healing and emotional growth. So hopefully with the plan, we're able to see Joe start to grow and change. Part of it too is hopefully Joe will be able to want to change as well.